The body hanging from the lighthouse gallery wasn't supposed to be there when Josephine Hayes climbed the iron stairs that November morning, her oil lamp casting dancing shadows against the Pacific fog. She stopped on the 73rd step, her breath catching not from exertion but from the impossible sight above. Through the spiral of wrought iron, she could see boots swaying gently in the wind that screamed off the Oregon coast. The lamp room's glass panels rattled in their frames, and somewhere below, the waves crashed against the rocks with the sound of cannon fire. Josephine was 30 years old and had lived in the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse for 27 of them. She knew every groan of its bones, every whistle of wind through its stones. She knew the weight of solitude and the rhythm of storms. But she had never known death to climb these stairs before her. Her hands trembled as she continued upward, the lamp oil sloshing in its container. The man wore a Union naval uniform, or what remained of one. The brass buttons were tarnished, the blue wool faded to gray. His face was turned away from her, toward the churning sea beyond the glass. A letter protruded from his coat pocket, the paper already damp from the relentless mist that invaded everything this close to the ocean. Josephine set down her lamp with practiced care. Fire was the lighthouse keeper's greatest fear, and reached for the letter. Her fingers brushed the coarse wool of his coat, still warm. Still warm. She jerked back, and that's when she saw his chest reason fall, shallow but unmistakable. "Dear God," she whispered, and her voice was swallowed by the wind. She grabbed the knife from her belt, the one she used for cutting rope and gutting fish, and sawed frantically at the noose. The hemp was new, strong, resistant. Her father had rope like this in the supply room, but she checked the inventory just yesterday. Nothing was missing. The man fell into her arms with dead weight, and they both crashed onto the iron grating. His head lolled against her shoulder, and she felt the faint flutter of pulse against her wrist. Josephine had pulled 3 drowning men from the rocks below, had set broken bones and burned away infection with whiskey and prayer. But she had never held someone who had tried to leave the world deliberately. "Stay with me," she commanded, though she didn't know why she cared if a stranger lived or died. Perhaps because death had no business in her lighthouse. Perhaps because she understood the seduction of the drop, the promise of the rocks below, better than she wanted to admit. She dragged him down the stairs, his boots clanging against iron, and into the keeper's house that clung to the lighthouse base like a barnacle. The kitchen still smelled of the coffee she'd brewed at dawn, and the fire in the hearth popped with driftwood. She laid him on the floor, her father's floor, though he'd been dead 3 months now, taken by pneumonia while she'd begged him to let her fetch the doctor from Astoria. The stranger's face was handsome in the way of broken things, all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and a scar ran from his left ear to his collar, white against sun-darkened skin. His lips were blue. She rubbed his hands between hers, then his feet, working blood back into extremities. His eyes opened suddenly, green as sea glass, and filled with such despair that Josephine recoiled. "Let me die," he rasped. "For the love of God, woman, let me die." "Not in my lighthouse," she said, and was surprised by the steel in her voice. "Whatever demons chase, you can wait until you're off my property." She made him drink water, then broth, then whiskey. He fought her weakly at first, then surrendered to the mechanics of survival. As color crept back into his face, Josephine studied him properly. The uniform was authentic, but old from the war that had ended 5 years ago. The boots were expensive once, now worn through at the heels. And his hands, when she'd held them, were calloused in patterns she recognized: rope burns, the kind sailors got, or hangmen. Night fell fast on the coast, and she lit the great Fresnel lens above them, sending its beam rotating across the dark water. 17 ships had wrecked on these rocks before her father took the post. None had wrecked in his 30 years of service. None would wreck in hers. The stranger watched her move through her evening routines with eyes that seemed to catalog everything. When she finally sat across from him, exhausted, he spoke again. "You should have let me finish it. Why were you in my lighthouse?" "I saw the light," he said simply. "Thought it was a sign. A place between heaven and earth." "It's a place between the ocean and the sky," Josephine corrected. "Nothing more mystical than that. Who are you?" "The keeper." "Who are you?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Captain James Brennan. Late of the USS Constellation. Late of everything that matters. "What brought you to Cape Disappointment, Captain?" His laugh was bitter as salt. The name seemed fitting. Josephine stood and walked to the window, where she could see the light sweeping across the water in its eternal pattern. 3 seconds of light, 2 of darkness, 3 of light, 2 of darkness. The rhythm her father had taught her, the rhythm that had become her heartbeat. "I've seen your face before," she said slowly, not turning around. 3 months ago. You were standing on the rocks below, watching the lighthouse. My father pointed you out. Said you'd been there for hours." She heard him shift behind her, the scrape of boots on wood. "Your father," he said, and something in his voice made her turn. "Augustus Hayes? You knew him." "I killed him," Captain James Brennan said, and the lighthouse light swept across his face, illuminating a truth that would change everything. "That's why I came back. To finish what I started." Josephine's hand moved to the knife at her belt before her mind fully processed his words. The blade was out and leveled at his throat in the space between heartbeats, steady despite the rage that flooded her veins like poison. "My father died of pneumonia," she said, each word carved from ice. "I watched him drown in his own lungs for 3 days. I held his hand while he suffocated." "Don't you dare! I know how he died," Brennan interrupted, and he didn't flinch from the blade. His eyes held hers with an intensity that felt like drowning. "I know because I gave him the sickness. I came to this lighthouse 6 months ago, already fevered, already dying myself. Your father took me in, nursed me, and I repaid his kindness by infecting him with a pneumonia that killed him." The knife wavered. "That's not murder. That's misfortune. Is it?" His voice cracked. "When I knew I was sick? When I could have stayed away but came here anyway because I was desperate, because I was selfish, because I needed—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I killed him as surely as if I put my hands around his throat." Josephine lowered the knife slowly. Outside, the storm was building, the wind shrieking around the lighthouse like a living thing. She could feel the structure swaying slightly, the way it always did in the worst storms. Her father had taught her not to fear that movement. The lighthouse was built to bend, he'd said. Rigidity breaks. Flexibility survives. "Why did you come here 6 months ago?" Brennan reached into his coat with careful movements, watching her eyes for permission. He withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages swollen with moisture, and handed it to her. The cover was embossed with initials, E.H. "That belonged to my mother," Josephine whispered. Eleanor Hayes had died when Josephine was 3, drowned in the very waters the lighthouse was meant to guard. Her father never spoke of her without pain crossing his face. "Where did you get this?" "From a woman named Margaret Chun in San Francisco. She runs a boarding house near the docks. Your mother lived there before she married your father. Mrs. Chun kept this journal for 27 years, waiting for someone from your mother's family to claim it. I was investigating something else entirely when I stumbled across it." Josephine's hands trembled as she opened the journal. Her mother's handwriting was elegant, educated, nothing like the rough script of most lighthouse keepers' wives. The entries were dated from 1843, the year before her parents married. April 3rd, 1843, he came to the boarding house again today. Captain Richard Brennan of the merchant ship Aurora. He brings me books from every port, and we talk for hours about places I'll never see. Father would be furious if he knew I was meeting with a sailor, but Richard is different. He speaks 4 languages. He's read Melville and Thoreau. And when he looks at me, I feel like I'm the lighthouse and he's the ship coming home." Josephine looked up sharply. "Richard Brennan. Your father?" James nodded, his expression unreadable. "Keep reading." She flipped through pages chronicling a romance that made her chest ache. Her mother had loved this Richard Brennan with the kind of passion that poets immortalized. But then the entries changed. June 19, 1843. Richard leaves for China tomorrow. He's asked me to wait for him. 2 years, he says, and he'll have enough money to give me the life I deserve. But Augustus Hayes has also asked for my hand. He's a good man, steady and kind. He offers security, a home. Richard offers adventure and uncertainty. My heart says Richard. My head says Augustus. What does a woman choose when both men offer different kinds of love? July 2nd, 1843. I've made my choice. I'm marrying Augustus next month. I've written to Richard, explaining everything. I do love Augustus, perhaps not with the wild passion I feel for Richard, but with something deeper, steadier, like the lighthouse itself. Richard will be hurt, but he'll understand. He must understand. July 30th, 1843. Richard returned early. He never received my letter. He came to the boarding house and found my wedding dress hanging in my room. The look on his face, I'll never forget it. He left without a word. Mrs. Chun says she saw him at the docks, drinking himself into oblivion. I'm married in 3 days, and my heart is breaking for a man who isn't my husband. The journal ended there. The remaining pages were blank. My father never stopped loving your mother, James said quietly. After she married Augustus, he destroyed himself slowly. Took dangerous routes, accepted impossible contracts. He came back to San Francisco every year, hoping to hear news of her. When he learned she drowned in 1846, something in him died too. He drank more, gambled more, until he lost his ship, his crew's respect, everything. He died in a boarding house in Hong Kong when I was 10 years old. Pneumonia, ironically. But it was really a broken heart that killed him. Josephine set the journal down carefully, as if it might shatter. Why bring this to my father? Why now, after all these years? Because before my father died, he told me the truth. Your mother didn't drown by accident, Josephine. She threw herself from the rocks below this lighthouse. Augustus found her body. There was a note, but he burned it. He couldn't bear for anyone to know she'd chosen death over the life they'd built together. The room tilted. Josephine gripped the table's edge, her knuckles white. You're lying. Your father confirmed it when I came 6 months ago. He was grateful, actually, to finally tell someone after carrying that secret for 24 years. We talked all night. He told me about you, about how you were the only thing that kept him going after your mother died. How you had her eyes, her intelligence, her stubbornness. How he was terrified you'd inherited her sadness too. Stop. Josephine's voice broke. Just stop. He asked me to do something, James continued relentlessly. He made me promise. He said you'd been refusing marriage proposals for years. From good men. Men who loved you. He was worried that after he died, you'd shut yourself away in this lighthouse forever, alone with ghosts. He made me promise to come back after he was gone and convince you to leave this place. To live. By telling me my mother killed herself? By carrying that poison here? Josephine laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the storm. And when that drove me to madness, what then? Were you going to push me off the rocks yourself to complete the family tradition? I was going to tell you the truth. But when I got here and saw you so alive, so fierce, so completely committed to this lighthouse, I realized I had no right. No right to burden you with my father's pain or your mother's choice. No right to ask you to change your life because your father feared you'd repeat history. So I climbed the lighthouse to finish what my father started 27 years ago. To end the Brennan family's curse on the Hayes family. Josephine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. Below, she could see the rocks where her mother had died. She'd stood on those rocks 1,000 times, watching the waves, feeling the spray, and never once had she wanted to join the water. I've been refusing marriage proposals, she said slowly, because every man who asks sees me as a problem to be solved. A woman alone is a tragedy, they think. A woman who chooses solitude must be saved from herself. They offer me rescue when I never asked to be saved. She turned to face him. There's one man who asked me different. Thomas Garrett, the harbormaster in Astoria. He proposed 3 years ago, and every 6 months since then, he asks again. He tells me he loves me. He tells me he'd come live here, in the lighthouse, and learn the keeping. He tells me he'd be honored to share my life, not replace it. Why haven't you accepted? And here it was, the truth she'd never spoken aloud. Because Thomas Garrett deserves better than half a woman's heart. Because I'm in love with someone I can never have. James stood slowly, his face carefully neutral. Who? The lighthouse, Josephine said simply. I'm in love with this lighthouse, with the rhythm of its light, with the responsibility of keeping ships safe. I'm in love with solitude and storms and the smell of oil and salt. Every man who wants to marry me wants me to choose him over this. But I can't, I won't, and I refuse to pretend otherwise. The confession hung between them like the storm outside, wild and fierce and true. James stared at her with something like wonder on his face. That's the most honest thing I've ever heard anyone say. And the most selfish? And the most brave? He crossed the room to stand before her, and she could see the pulse beating in his throat, rapid and alive. Your father was wrong. You're not hiding from life. You're living the life you chose. That's not sadness. That's courage. Then why? Josephine demanded. Were you standing on my rocks 6 months ago, watching this lighthouse for hours? His answer was barely a whisper. Because I saw you in the lamp room. The way you moved, the way you touched everything with reverence. And I thought, here is someone who understands what it means to love something impossible. Someone who knows devotion. And I wanted, what did you want? To know what that felt like. To love something that much. To have a purpose that pure. His eyes met hers. I've spent my whole life being my father's ghost. Living his regrets. Carrying his broken heart like a stone around my neck. I came to your lighthouse because I thought I'd find answers about why your mother couldn't live. Instead, I found you, and you showed me exactly how to live. Completely. Without apology. Without compromise. The lighthouse beam swept through the room, illuminating his face in intervals, light and dark, truth and shadow. Josephine felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening in a house she'd thought was completely furnished. You shouldn't have come back, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. I know. I saved your life. You owe me now, I know. The storm is too dangerous. You'll have to stay until it passes. I know. Outside, the wind howled and the waves crashed and the lighthouse stood firm, its beam cutting through the darkness with mechanical precision. Inside, Josephine Hayes and James Brennan stood in the space between past and future, between grief and hope, between two kinds of love that couldn't coexist but somehow, impossibly did. 3 days the storm raged, and 3 days Josephine and James existed in the strange suspension of time that comes when the world outside becomes impassable. They maintained the light together, climbing the stairs and shifts, James learning the rhythm she'd known her whole life. He had sailor's hands, quick and capable, and he learned to trim the wicks and polish the lens without being taught twice. On the second night, as they ate the last of her dried fish and hardtack, he told her about the war, about watching his men die at sea, about the Confederate raider that sank 3 of his convoy ships before he finally cornered it near the Florida coast, about the young captain aboard that raider who looked like somebody's son, somebody's brother, as James's cannon fire tore through his hull. "I dream about his face," James said quietly, staring into the fire. "Every night for 5 years. I see him in the water, drowning, reaching up for help I couldn't give even if I wanted to." Josephine understood then why he'd climbed her lighthouse stairs with a rope. Some burdens were too heavy for one person to carry alone. On the 3rd morning, she woke to find him gone from his bedroll. Panic seized her chest, irrational, immediate, absolute. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her heart pounding, certain she'd find him on the gallery rail, certain she'd been a fool to think 3 days of purpose could cure 5 years of ghosts. But he was in the lamp room, sitting cross-legged beneath the great Fresnel lens as dawn light poured through it, splitting into rainbows across his upturned face. He looked like a man at prayer. "I thought," she couldn't finish. "I'm still here," he said simply. "I promised you the storm, remember?" The storm broke that afternoon with the peculiar suddenness of coastal weather. One moment the wind was shrieking, the next it was merely sighing, tired from its own fury. The sun emerged tentatively, turning the ocean from iron to silver. "You should go," Josephine said, though the words felt like broken glass in her throat. "While the weather holds." Before James could answer, she heard the clatter of hoofbeats on the rocky path. Through the window, she saw Thomas Garrett riding toward the lighthouse, his face set with worry. He was a solid man, Thomas, broad-shouldered and steady, with kind brown eyes and hands that could gentle a spooked horse or mend a broken net with equal patience. He dismounted and took the steps 2 at a time, bursting through the door with relief written across every feature. "Josephine, thank God. When the storm came and you didn't answer the signal flags from Astoria, I thought—" He stopped, seeing James standing in the shadows. "Who's this?" "Captain James Brennan," Josephine said carefully. "His boat was caught in the storm. He sheltered here." Thomas's face shifted, something darkening in his expression. "Brennan. I know that name. You're the one who came through Astoria 6 months back, asking questions about the Hayes family. About Eleanor Hayes specifically. People talked about it for weeks." He turned to Josephine. "What's he doing here?" "Returning something that belonged to my mother," Josephine said, and the truth of it was strange in her mouth, neither lie nor whole truth. Thomas studied James with the careful assessment of a man who'd navigated treacherous waters his whole life. Then he looked at Josephine, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes, followed by something that looked like resignation. "I see," he said quietly. "Thomas. No, I see it now. After 3 years of asking, I finally understand." He smiled, but it was weighted with sadness. "I thought you were in love with this lighthouse. But that was only part of it, wasn't it? You were waiting for someone who understood what it meant to love something impossible. Someone who could look at your devotion and recognize it instead of trying to cure it." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. I know." Thomas crossed the room and took her hands in his grip warm and familiar. "I've loved you for 3 years, Josephine Hayes. I'd have loved you for 30 more. But I can't compete with a man who climbs lighthouses looking for reasons to live and finds them in watching you tend a lamp. That's the kind of love that changes people. The kind that saves them." He released her hands and turned to James. "You heard her, Brennan, and I'll tie that rope around your neck myself and finish what you started. Understand?" James met his gaze steadily. "I understand, but I can't promise not to hurt her, because I'm leaving. Today, I came here to die, and she gave me a reason to live." But that reason can't be her. She already chose what she loves, and I won't be the man who makes her choose again. James, Josephine started, but he was already moving toward the door, gathering the few belongings he'd brought with him. Your father was right to worry about you, James said, his back to her. Not because you're like your mother, but because you're so different from her. She couldn't live without the love she lost. You've built an entire life from loving something that can never love you back. That takes a strength I don't have. I need to find my own lighthouse, Josephine. My own purpose. And I can't do that standing in the shadow of yours. He turned at the door, his green eyes holding hers one last time. Thank you for saving my life. I'll try to deserve it. Then he was gone, walking down the rocky path toward where the storm had left the world washed clean and new. Thomas stood beside Josephine at the window, and they watched together in silence until James Brennan disappeared around the headland. Are you going to go after him? Thomas asked. Josephine's hand moved unconsciously to the iron railing of the lighthouse stairs, feeling the cold metal beneath her palm, solid and real and constant. Her lighthouse. Her purpose. Her impossible love. No, she whispered, and felt something inside her break cleanly, like a bone that would have to heal crooked. I made my choice a long time ago. But even as she said it, she wondered if choosing the lighthouse meant she just lost the only person who truly understood why. 6 months passed like the turning of tides, inevitable, rhythmic, relentless. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, and Josephine kept the light burning every night without fail. She hired a boy from Astoria to help with supplies, but she climbed the stairs alone, polished the lens alone, watched the beam cut through darkness alone. Thomas stopped asking her to marry him, but he came by once a month with news and provisions, his friendship a quiet anchor she hadn't known she needed. He never mentioned James Brennan, and neither did she, though his name lived in her throat like a prayer she couldn't speak. She tried not to think about green eyes and scarred hands in a man who'd looked at her devotion like it was something holy instead of something broken. She tried not to wonder if he'd found his lighthouse, his purpose, his reason to wake each morning. She tried not to count the ships that passed safely because of her light and imagine him aboard one of them, sailing away to somewhere she'd never know. She failed at all of it. On a July evening, when the air was thick with salt and the promise of fog, Josephine climbed the lighthouse stairs to light the lamp. The sun was setting, painting the Pacific in shades of copper and gold. And she performed her ritual with the same reverence she always had checking the oil, trimming the wick, positioning the reflectors with mathematical precision. The light blazed to life and she stood in its rotation, letting it wash over her in intervals. 3 seconds of light, 2 of darkness. The heartbeat of the coast. The rhythm that had been her entire world. She heard footsteps on the iron stairs below. For one wild moment, her heart seized with impossible hope. But it was probably Thomas, or the supply boy, or a sailor seeking shelter. She forced herself to breathe normally as the footsteps grew closer, steady and unhurried. James Brennan emerged into the lamp room like a ghost made solid, and Josephine forgot how to breathe entirely. He looked different. The hollowness in his cheeks had filled out. The desperation in his eyes had been replaced by something quieter, steadier. He wore simple clothes, a fisherman's wool coat, canvas trousers, boots worn from honest work. And he carried something wrapped in oilcloth under his arm. I found my lighthouse, he said without preamble, as if 6 months hadn't passed, as if he'd only stepped out for an hour instead of half a year. It's in Alaska, a place called Eldred Rock up in the Inside Passage. The territory's opening up new routes, and they need keepers willing to work in isolation. The kind of isolation that makes Cape Disappointment look like downtown San Francisco. Josephine's hands gripped the brass rail of the lamp housing, keeping herself upright. That's good. I'm glad you found purpose." "I didn't just find purpose," James said, moving closer. "I found myself. Or maybe I built myself. I'm not sure there's a difference." He set down the oilcloth bundle and unwrapped it, revealing the most beautiful scale model of a lighthouse she'd ever seen. It was carved from driftwood, every detail perfect: the gallery, the lamp room, even tiny glass panels fashioned from polished shell. "I made this," he said. "I've been carving for 6 months, learning the trade. Turns out I'm good with my hands when I'm not trying to destroy myself with them. There's a Russian carpenter in Sitka who's teaching me. I'm going to build things now. Beautiful things. Useful things. Things that help people instead of hurting them." "James, I need to finish," he said urgently. "I practiced this speech for 300 miles. The Eldred Rock Lighthouse needs 2 keepers. The winters are brutal. The supply ships only come monthly in summer and not at all in winter. You'd be isolated for months at a time. It's dangerous work, the kind that kills people who aren't prepared." He took a breath. "But the territory will pay you double what the Lighthouse Board pays here. And they'll let you run it your way. No inspectors breathing down your neck, no bureaucrats second-guessing your methods. Just you and the light and the work you love." Josephine stared at him. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking you to bring your lighthouse with you. Not this one, I know you can't take it. But what it means. What it is. I'm asking if you'd be willing to love a new lighthouse, one where you wouldn't have to be alone, where you could have both the work you love and someone who understands why you love it. You're asking me to leave my father's lighthouse, my mother's lighthouse, the only home I've ever known." "No," James said firmly. "I'm asking if you're willing to build a new home. With me, not instead of this, but in addition to it. Your father kept ships safe for 30 years. You've kept them safe for 6 months alone. That's a legacy that stands on its own. But there are new waters that need you now. New ships. New lives to save." The lamp rotated between them, light and shadow, revelation and concealment. Josephine thought about her mother, who'd chosen wrong and couldn't live with it. About her father, who'd chosen right but carried regret anyway. About Thomas, who'd chosen her and learned when to let go. About herself, who'd chosen the lighthouse because it was the one thing that would never leave her. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "That I'll go with you and resent you for taking me from this place. That I'll stay and spend the rest of my life wondering what I missed. That there's no right choice, only different ways to break my own heart." James reached out slowly and took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses on her palm, the same rope burns he had, the same oil stains, the same marks of their shared devotion. "Then choose the break that lets you grow," he said. "My father chose to shatter, and it killed him. Your mother chose to shatter, and it killed her. But you're not them. You're the woman who saved a stranger's life because death had no business in your lighthouse. You're the woman who told me the bravest thing I'd ever heard, that you loved something impossible, and refused to apologize for it. That woman doesn't break. She bends. She adapts. She survives." The lighthouse beam swept through the lamp room, illuminating his face with perfect clarity. And Josephine realized that for 6 months she'd been keeping this light burning not just for the ships outside, but for the possibility that he might find his way back to her. That love didn't have to be impossible. It just had to be true. "I'd need to train my replacement," she said, and watched hope bloom across his features like sunrise. "The Lighthouse Board requires 3 months' notice for a transfer. And I'd need to take my mother's journal, and my father's logbooks." And James kissed her then, gentle and sure, tasting like salt air and new beginnings. When he pulled back, he was smiling in a way that made him look 10 years younger. "Take whatever you need. I'll wait. I've gotten good at waiting for worthwhile things. 3 months, Josephine said, feeling something expand in her chest that might have been fear or might have been joy or might have been both at once. And then Alaska. And then Alaska, James agreed. And then a lifetime of keeping lights burning together. Outside, the Pacific rolled eternal against the rocks. Inside the lamp room, two people who'd both tried to love impossible things discovered that the most impossible thing of all was learning to love each other, without losing themselves. They stood together as the beam rotated, and Josephine Hayes realized that she wasn't abandoning her lighthouse at all. She was finally learning what her father had tried to teach her all along, that love wasn't about choosing between devotion and connection. It was about finding someone who understood that you needed both, and being brave enough to build a new light together in the darkness. The Cape Disappointment lighthouse would keep burning long after she left, tended by new hands, saving new ships. And somewhere in Alaska, another lighthouse would rise on Eldred Rock. Built partially from driftwood carved by a man who'd learned to create instead of destroy. Maintained by a woman who'd learned that leaving home didn't mean leaving herself behind. The beam swept across the water. 3 seconds of light, 2 of darkness, 3 seconds of light. 2 of darkness, the eternal rhythm of hope cutting through fear, of purpose meeting love. Of 2 broken people becoming whole together in the space between the ocean and the sky.